Hello and welcome back to the Winning Agenda. My name's Jesse Muehlman-Marshall and I'm here with our Dromai Ash Artist Hero Spotlight. This is the first of the Uprising heroes that we're going to be doing a Hero Spotlight on. And I'm very excited that it's Dromai. As much as I've enjoyed Icelander, and I'm really looking forward to the Icelander Hero Spotlight, Dromai's dragons and the way that she plays the game and the abilities that this hero has are really, really exciting. So I'm looking forward to discussing those with you today. So the first thing to touch on is Dromai's hero ability. So it says, whenever you pitch a red card, create an Ash token. A red card is a card with a red color strip, of course. If you've played a red card this turn, dragons you control have go again while attacking. If an attacking dragon dies before Chainlink Resolution, you don't go again. So this is similar to Phantasm on Prism's cards that can gain go again from Luminaris. So Dromai here giving go again to dragons who are attacking, but similar to Prism's Heralds, if they're destroyed by Phantasm, or they otherwise die before the Chainlink Resolution step, you don't get the go again. So we're already seeing there the potential to go really, really wide, this time with dragons rather than heralds from hand, although of course Prism can also go wide with auras. But the additional danger here is that the aura equivalents, the dragons, the permanents on the board, are the ones that have Phantasm, and the attack actions from hand are the ones that may not. Of course, some of them do, but some of them don't. So it's sort of a reversal of that Prism board state, which just from a conceptual perspective is in some ways lower in power and some ways higher in power. So with Dromai, you can set up a turn with your attack action cards that don't have Phantasm to at least get some value out of your hand before the Phantasm popper comes along. But the downside of your go wide auras or your permanents, in this case dragons, having Phantasm, is that they can all be popped. So once you get to that part of your turn, one popper can potentially stop your turn. And the key thing is that Phantasmal Footsteps, the illusionist foot piece or leg piece, that could, of course, very frequently return Prism's action point back if one of the heralds got popped, only works on attack action cards. So it will work on Phantasm cards that Dromai plays if they're attack actions, but not the actual ally dragons themselves. So we'll come to all that a bit later, but that's just a little bit about the kind of basics of the Dromai hero card and the way that it interacts with both the existing illusionist card pool and some of the new cards that we're going to see. The next thing to think about is Ash. So what exactly does Ash do? So Ash is, as I mentioned, something which sits on the board, and then anything that is placed on top of it, whether it's dragons or either Ashwings, other allies, is going to gain Phantasm. So whilst Ash is underneath them, they will have Phantasm as an inherent characteristic. And of course, I should have mentioned earlier, Phantasm means that when it's defended by a non-illusionist attack action card with 6 or more power, you destroy the card and close the combat chain. So as I mentioned, with dragons, which we're going to see in a moment, if Dromai summons a dragon on top of an Ash and attacks, if it's blocked by a non-illusionist attack action card with 6 or more power, the dragon will be destroyed and the combat chain will be closed before the go again resolves. So Storm of Sandakai is the weapon that Dromai is going to be bringing to the fight. It says, dragon allies you control have once per turn action, 0 resources, attack. So we can see the combination of Dromai's ability, Storm of Sandakai, and the Ash token is giving us the kind of very basics and the foundations of the Dromai deck. And of course, here on screen, we've got Underground Games, our sponsor for the video. Thanks to Rob at Underground Games for supporting the Winning Agenda. If you want to get a discount on your singles for Uprising, if you're looking to pick up some Dromai cards, you can head along to www.undergroundgamesbh.com.au and Rob will ship those out to you, and you can use a code TWA5, that's the Winning Agenda, TWA5, for 5% off at Underground Games as well. So thanks, Rob, for that. So Ashwings are one of the uses for your Ash, and one of the things that you can do to build a board presence. So these little guys are allies that have 1 attack power and 1 life, and they also have Arcane Barrier 1. They are Draconic Illusionist tokens, and they are Dragon allies. So crucially, they will have the ability to attack from Storm of Sandakai, Dromai's weapon, and they will also get Go Again from Dromai's ability because they're dragons as well, as long as you play a red card. So they can attack, they'll have go again if you've played a red card, and each of them is attacking for 1. Now, one of the things for people who've played Prism before that you need to get used to when you sit down to play games as Dromai is that your either Ashwings may look like Spectral Shields. You know, you're building them up on the board, you're getting sort of a couple into play each turn, but they don't actually block damage. So if your opponent just comes at your face, yes, they don't die, which is great, but they also don't defend your life total at all, or, you know, stop breakpoints, you know, allow you to block with a 3 power and lose 1 Spectral Shield to stop a 4 power attack with a non-hit ability, for example. So Dromai can be a little more vulnerable than Prism to attacks coming back the other way for that reason. But either Ashwings do have to be attacked separately. So unlike a Spectral Shield, where your opponent can come in with 1 big attack at you, and if you can't block at all, you're going to automatically lose some Spectral Shields. The flip side is that either Ashwings, while they don't block any of that damage, they also have to be attacked separately and killed separately, or popped with a Phantasm popper, as I described earlier. So these guys, because they're on top of an Ash, and they're placed on top of an Ash by the cards that summon them, they will all have Phantasm as another inherent characteristic. So if you attack with them and your opponent blocks with a 6 power card, 6 power attack action card that's non-illusionist, then the either Ashwing will die, it'll be destroyed, and your combat chain will close, which means you won't even get the go again from Dromai's ability. So that's something to be really, really careful of when you're constructing a Dromai deck, being aware of Phantasm and how much of a drawback it is, and finding ways to mitigate it. So Rake the Embers is probably the number one way to summon either Ashwings in the set. It's got a lot of great synergies with Dromai's hero ability, because it does cost 1, so it allows you to pitch a red card to play it. It also is a red card itself in the red version, meaning that it turns on Dromai's ability and gives all your dragons go again for the turn. And what it says is create an Ash token, then transform up to 3 Ash you control into either Ashwings. Go again. So if you start your turn off, if you've already got 1 Ash in play, then you pitch a red card to play Rake the Embers. You'll create a second because you've pitched a red card from Dromai's ability. And then when Rake the Embers resolves, you'll create a 3rd Ash token and then transform all 3, the one you started with, the one you created from Dromai's ability from the pitch, and the one that Rake the Embers creates. You'll transform them all into 3 either Ashwings, which you can then attack with because the Rake the Embers has go again. And because you've played a red card, each of the Ashwings will also have go again. So that's a red Rake the Embers is an excellent turn starter, and that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about a little bit more as we go through the video, is the cards, particularly the red cards, that allow you to start your turn off powerfully by allowing you to pitch a red card to get an Ash, for example, but also being a red card themselves to turn on Dromai's ability to give all your dragons go again. So having those openers, those red turn openers, is very, very important in thinking about a Dromai strategy. Skittering Sands is another one that's a good opener. So it's a 0 cost non-attack action with go again. It says transform target Ash you control into an either Ashwing. It gains +3 strength until end of turn, or +3 power. So you can create an either Ashwing that's going to attack for 4 that turn. It will also turn on Dromai's ability to give all your dragons go again. So if you have some existing Ashwings from a previous turn or existing dragons that you've managed to keep around, then they will all have go again as well. So Skittering Sands at red, another great way to start your turn. Billowing Mirage, similarly, is a 1 cost 3 power attack action card. Doesn't have Phantasm, so very good way to start your turn without worrying about getting a Phantasm popper off the bat. Costing 1 means that you are probably netting an Ash when you play it, and then when it resolves, when you attack with it, you transform up to 1 Ash you control into an either Ashwing. And really, really importantly, you don't have to transform an Ash into an Ashwing with Billowing Mirage. It's optional. So you can choose to just take the 1 cost 3 power attack with go again, and then, for instance, play into a dragon next, because perhaps that Ash is the one you need to transform into a dragon. So be really deliberate about how you play your Billowing Mirages, and don't be afraid to leave the Ash there if you've got something better to transform it into later in the turn. So what do we mean when we talk about dragons? So we'll start off, we've got Chromai, who is a 0 cost spell. Invoke Dromai is behind there. So you can see I've laid out the dragon itself in front, and then each of the Invoke spells behind, just so you can see the cost. So each of them is a double-sided card. The front side is Invoke. It'll have a cost, and it'll basically just say transform an Ash you control into whatever the dragon is. So Invoke Chromai costs 0. It'll allow you to transform one of your Ash that's already in play into Chromai, which means you put Chromai on top. Chromai will have Phantasm, so if it attacks and it's blocked by a 6 or more power attack action card that's non-illusionist, the Chromai will die immediately and the combat chain will close. But Chromai is a great example of a way that the dragons help you mitigate the Phantasm downside and also help you create a suite of threats, particularly these value dragons, that will allow you to hopefully deploy more threats than your opponent can deal with on their turn. So what Dromai does is it helps you manage that Phantasm downside. So it's a 3 power, 2 strength dragon, so 2 health. Once per turn, when Dromai attacks or leaves the arena, gain 1 action point. So the when Dromai attacks trigger will only happen as you attack with it. And it's only once per turn, so you won't gain 1 when it attacks and when it leaves the arena. You'll only get 1 or the other. So gain 1 action point. So what this does is that even if your Dromai is defended by a Phantasm Popper, by a 6 or more power non-illusionist attack, you will still have another action point remaining with which to attack with another dragon. So you can see lots of opportunities where you can either try and build up Dromai and another dragon on a turn, or try and build up, I think even better, multiple dragons over multiple turns. Try and play 2 per turn for a sequence of turns in the middle of the game. Hope that you can stick 1 or 2, or even if you can build up to 3 in play, that's obviously amazing. And then if you can stick Dromai on the turn that you want to go for the face a bit more with your dragons, then you can be guaranteed that you're going to get at least a couple of swings in. And on those turns where you are building up and you're trying to play 2 dragons per turn, Dromai can basically guarantee that you're not only going to be able to play them, but at least be able to swing with 2 of them. So it helps to just gain a little bit more value. And of course, all of this is assuming that your opponent does have a Phantasm Popper in turn. So they're having to commit 1 card in hand to deal with your Dromai. And unlike all of the other dragons and all the other Phantasm cards, your Dromai has cost you 0 resource to play, 1 card to play, and it's taken a 6 or more power attack out of their hand, and it hasn't even cost you an action point really to attack with it. So Dromai, I think, is a really powerful card. It's coming in for 3 as well, which is nothing to sneeze at. And it has the potential to help set up some really powerful turns for Dromai. So the next one is Kylorea. So Kylorea is a 1 cost, 4 power, 2 strength or 2 defense or health dragon. Whenever Kylorea hits a hero, you gain control of an item they control. So for instance, if they're dashed and they've got items in play, if you hit, then you get to take one of their items permanently. And if you don't gain control of an item, then you draw a card. So this is basically a 1 cost snatch. That's going to have go again if you've played a red card this turn, which you will have if you've played this, or if you play another invoke spell on the turn that you want to attack with it. It's a great breakpoint for, so if it manages to hit, then you draw a card, which is amazing value. It's a great way if they don't have a Phantasm Popper and they aren't able to destroy this, they're very likely to have to commit at least a card and equipment, or possibly 2 cards to stop this draw trigger from hitting. And then you're left with a 2 defense dragon in play that they have to deal with the next turn. The other good thing about Invoke Kylorea is that, as you'll see as we go through the suite of dragons, there's a nice mix in the rare dragon slot. So both Kylorea and Dromai are rare rather than majestic, and they're not legendary in the sense of you can only have 1 per deck. So you can have 3 copies of these cards in your deck. And amongst those dragons, there are a good spread of dragons that cost 1, 2, and 3. 0, 1, 2, and 3, with the bulk of them costing 0 and 1. And having a good balance of things like Dromai that you can play as a single card, so it doesn't cost any resources, and Kylorea, which actually costs 1. But in Dromai, what that allows you to do is also create an Ash to chain Ash for your next dragon. So if Kylorea is your only play on the turn, because say you've blocked with a couple of cards on your opponent's turn, then at least you're leaving an Ash on the board for the following turn if you want to invoke a dragon as your first play. So chaining together those 1 cost dragons can be a really nice way to keep things rolling in Dromai and not get stuck with a hand that doesn't do anything. So be very, careful to remember that 1 cost spells or things that generate and net you Ash can actually be really, really important for keeping up your tempo. So the next one I'm going to look at as a sort of value piece is Dominia, which is, as you can see there, a legendary card. So as it says, a legendary invocation to transform a chosen ash you possess into Dominia. That doesn't mean legendary rarity. It just means legendary in the sense you can only have one in your deck. So you can have one copy of Invoke Dominia. It costs 4 resources to play. And Dominia itself is a 4 power and 4 strength or health dragon. So it says, whenever Dominia attacks a hero, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a red card, so if it's got a red color pitch, look at their hand and banish a card from it. So unlike Kylorea, which needs to hit and then has the capacity to draw you a card, Dominia's ability triggers just on attacking, doesn't need to hit, and all you need is to have a red card on top of your deck, which will most likely, I think in most Dromai decks, be around 2/3 of your cards in your deck, in your starting deck at least, will be red. And you'll look at their hand if you hit, as in if there's a red card on top, and you'll banish a card from it. So getting that straight up card advantage of no matter whether they block or not, I guess compulsorily stripping a card is really powerful. And the fact that it's when it attacks this triggers means that it's before they declare their defending cards. So if they only have one Phantasm Popper in hand, you can get rid of their Phantasm Popper as well, which means that Dominia can not only guarantee that it gets through safely, but also make sure that if you've got any other dragons or either Ashwings, you get information about their hand to know whether they're safe to come in as well. So I think Dominia is going to be one of the most powerful cards in the Dromai decks. It's got that resilience to Phantasm inherent in the capacity to take a card from their hand and to see the rest of their hand. But it's also got a level of card advantage, if you like, in that you're getting a permanent that's going on the board, that's staying there, and you're stripping a card from hand, and that card is not actually defending any damage at all. So Dominia, a very, very strong dragon, and one that I think is pretty much compulsory to start with in your deck if you're going with any kind of dragon plan. Invoke Tomaltai is another one of the legendary, so 1 per deck invocations. And Tomaltai itself, again, has a really outsized impact on the game for 1 card. So this one costs 5 resources, which is quite a lot when you're playing a red heavy deck. So you're going to have to either do a bit of setup or think about your resource curve in your deck to be able to play once you get above 4 and up towards these 5 and 6 cost dragons. But Tomaltai is 5 power and 5 health. And whenever Tomaltai attacks a hero, reveal the top 2 cards of your deck. If 1 or more red cards are revealed, put that many -1 counters on an equipment they control. Then if it has 0 defense, destroy it. So this is, the Bane of Crown of Seeds. It's potentially the Bane of New Horizon, if you hit 2. All of these powerful equipment that are really essential to those heroes' game plans. If you can get Tomaltai out, and if you come from a magic background, all these dragons effectively have haste. Yes, they can be destroyed and their abilities can be negated somewhat by being popped as a Phantasm, using the Phantasm trigger. But Tomaltai's ability is going to go off. It's going to reveal. You're going to reveal the top 2 cards of your deck and just snipe one of their equipment. And that is just extremely powerful and really difficult for your opponent to play around. So Tomaltai, definitely one worth considering, and definitely a very, very powerful effect. Obviously, paying 5 for this effect is a lot. It means you may have to take some damage in the way that Fab works in order to be able to keep enough cards in hand on your turn to be able to summon the Tomaltai. But it's a great way to try and pivot, as well as gaining a bit more advantage in the long game by destroying a key piece of equipment on the other side of the board. So we'll move on to some of the other dragons. These ones are dragons that are just more about pure damage output than protecting your hand or interrupting and disrupting your opponent's game plan. So the first one is Dracona Optimi. It's our 6 cost dragon. It's another one of the legendary invocations, so only 1 per deck. So it costs 6, and it's 6 power and 6 health. And it says, whenever Dracona Optimi attacks a hero, reveal the top 3 cards of your deck. He deals arcane damage equal to twice the number of red cards revealed this way to them or an ally they control. So it's all 3 of the legendary invocations, so the 1 per deck dragons, have these on attack triggers. So when Dracona Optimi attacks, you reveal 1 for Dominia, 2 for Tomaltai, 3 for Dracona Optimi. So you can get up to 3 triggers or 3 hits from this off the top of your deck, but by revealing red cards. And the benefit you get is arcane damage equal to twice the number of red cards you reveal this way, to them or an ally they control. So good in the mirror match. good if they've got any allies in play. So this can basically be, if you do hit 3 reds on top, that's another 6 damage. So a 6 cost 12 damage attack, which is extremely good. Not only as an attack, but an attack that's going to have go again on the turn that you play it, because you will have played a red card, and it's going to give all the rest of your dragons go again, and it's going to stay on the board and your opponent's going to have to deal with it. So if we compare that to something like Crippling Crush, you're paying 7 resources for an 11 power attack with, yes, a powerful on-hit ability, but it doesn't stick around, it doesn't have go again. This costs 6, and yes, it's in a deck that's going to be playing fewer blues and all of that. Completely understand it's slightly different context, but just to give you some idea of where the power level of this card sits in terms of just the raw numbers, 6 cost for 6 plus the potential for another 6, with a very likely go again, and with a permanent attached to it, that you get to do the same thing for free next turn if your opponent doesn't deal with it. That's a very, very powerful card. So just like the other 2 legendary dragons, or one of invocations, I think this one's going to see a lot of play in these Dromai decks, but it does, because of the 6 cost, impose a few more deck building restrictions on you. Although the Invoke side blocks for 3, meaning that if you get into a game situation where you think you're unlikely to be able to play it, your life's too low to be able to reserve that many cards in hand to be able to play something like this, and you want to just try and work your way back into the game using some lower cost dragons, of course you can just block with this for 3, and that's no problem. So Vinserakai is another of the sort of offensive dragons. This one has 3 cost, and you can play up to 3 of them in your deck. The dragon itself has 6 power and 1 health, and it says whenever Vinserakai hits a hero, he deals 3 arcane damage to them. So when we talked about rate, this is one that costs 3 and is threatening 9 damage on the turn it comes down. Obviously, if you're playing against a wizard, then it might be a little bit too risky to play Vinserakai, so it's probably going to be sideboarded out against Icelander or against Kano. But if you can land Vinserakai and you're against a hero that's unlikely to be dealing you damage on your turn, or to be able to deal damage to an ally on your turn specifically, then the rate on this as a 3 for 9 attack is very, very good. And as with all the others, against some decks, against Guardian decks that are a little bit poorer on action points, and where the tax of dealing 1 damage to Vinserakai is likely to be higher, and the cost of doing that is likely to be higher, Vinserakai gets even more powerful. So the more resources and cards that your opponent has to put into a basic attack to kill Vinserakai, the more powerful this card is. If you're playing against, the very other end of the spectrum, something like Ninja that's going to have a whole lot of, Phoenix Flames, which are basically free cards for Fi, and Fi can just throw 1 at Vinserakai at one point in their turn, then maybe this isn't where you want to be. But even having the capacity to just put it down and send a 3 for 9 their way probably means that Vinserakai might even see play in those Fi matchups. Remains to be seen, but it's definitely one to keep an eye on. Invoke Asvalai is one that I think is going to see some more play in sideboards. It is good at clearing out. It's a 0 cost. It's got decent stats, 2 attack and 3 health for a 0 cost dragon. So it's sort of the inverse of Chroma. It says, whenever Asvalai attacks, you may have him deal 1 arcane damage to up to any 2 targets. So he can deal 1 arcane damage to the hero, which means it's basically a 0 cost 3 for 3. So that's not too bad as far as these dragons go in terms of cost to attack ratio. But then you've also got, in the mirror match or against anyone else who's playing allies, the ability to deal 1 arcane damage to the allies themselves. So you could attack for 2 and deal 1 to 2 separate either Ashwings, or you could deal 2 to the opponent from the physical damage, 1 arcane to the opponent, and 1 to an either Ashwing. Of course, the other thing that Asvalai can do, if that ever becomes relevant, is deal 1 arcane damage to you, but that seems unlikely at this stage. There are, I think, with Oovia and Constellus, wizards maybe wanting to deal arcane damage to themselves and prevent it with Arcane Barrier a bit more, but I don't think that illusionists are quite there at this point, but we'll see. Resilient dragons. So these are the dragons that are a little bit harder for your opponent to remove from the board once they're down. We saw the ones that will give you some advantage, I guess, even if they're destroyed in the first slide. And then we've seen the ones just then that are going to give you some advantage from just raw damage output on the turn that you play them, if they do manage to get through. And then these ones are the dragons that are a little bit more resilient to being removed from the board. Obviously, they all have the downside of Phantasm, but these ones are a little bit harder for your opponent to just straight up remove with damage. So the first of them is Oovia. It's a 2 cost. You can have 3 of them in your deck. And it's a 1 power 6 health dragon. It says, at the start of your turn or when Oovia enters the arena, transform up to 1 ash you control into an either Ashwing. So if you pitch 2 reds to play Oovia on turn 1, that's kind of the dream, you get this down, you get to turn 1 into either Ashwing, or 1 of the ash that you get for pitching your 2 reds into an either Ashwing straight away. And then if they don't kill Oovia and deal 6 damage to it, every turn you're going to be generating another either Ashwing, as long as you have unused ash in play. So I think, you do need to have the ash to be able to make use of this ability. So if you're not doing stuff proactively on your turn to generate those ash, and if you're not generating spare ash, then Oovia may not be good enough. But I think the fact that this generates additional threats every turn, potentially, without you having to invest additional cards, or action points or anything else, it just does it sort of as a passive at the beginning of your turn, I think makes it very powerful, and it means that you also don't need to attack with this to expose it to being popped by Phantasm in order for it to do its thing, which is something that the other dragons don't have as much. So I think Oovia has the potential to fill a bit of a niche in the Dromai decks, in allowing a different pattern of play to some of the other dragons. Invoke Mirror Guy is another resilient dragon. It costs 1, so it's another one of the 1 costs, which is going to generate an ash as you play it. And I should mention they just released a rules clarification today, that if you have no ash in play and you pitch a red to play one of these dragon invocations, you can't actually invoke onto the ash that you generate from Dromai's ability for pitching a red, because the invocations require you to target an ash. And at the time that you pitch and pay the costs to play the invocation, you need to already have the ash in play. So yeah, you can't use the one that you generate from pitching to play the invocation. But anyway, obviously, if you have one in play, you pitch to turn that one into Mirror Guy, and you pitch a red, then you'll also have an ash, as I said earlier, for the following turn, which is a nice play pattern to have with these 1-cost dragons. And what Mirror Guy does is it's a 2 power 4 health dragon. And I think 4 health is going to be a nice spot to be. It requires a little bit more of a chunkier attack, a bit more commitment from your opponent to kill it. And the first dragon attack that you attack with each turn loses and can't gain Phantasm. So that's very strong. So this is resilient not only on its own part, but if you do manage to, say, play 2 dragons the turn before, they don't get popped, your opponent kills one of them on the backswing, and then you're left with 1 dragon. Mirror Guy can come down and protect that dragon the following turn, the one that's already in play, and you can attack with it, and you don't have to worry about Phantasm. And then they've got Mirror Guy and the other one to deal with. So it just basically splinters your opponent's answers, if you like. It means that you've got some way to get around this Phantasm drawback, and your opponents can't just sit there sandbagging Phantasm cards and knowing that at some point in the game they're going to be able to destroy your turn completely. It's just another way, another tool that Dromai has to get around that play pattern, which is really important and really nice, and nice to have on a 1-cost dragon with a bit more of a defensive side as well. Necria is a 3-cost dragon. So this one, it's really interesting because 3 is quite a lot. You can have 3 of them, up to 3 of them in your deck. It does have 7 defense and 4 attack. But whenever it deals or is dealt damage, so whenever you attack with it and it's not fully blocked, or whenever your opponent attacks Necria, you put a -1 counter on her and create an ash token. So Necria, as the art kind of indicates, just sheds ash everywhere whenever anything happens. But Necria also is weakening herself in the process. However, generating incidental ash, I was going to say free ash, but it's more incidental ash, is something really powerful, considering things like Oovia and things like the play pattern of dragons requiring you to already have ash on the board. Having something, there aren't a lot of cards in this card pool that generate surplus ash, and there's a lot of things to transform ash either into Ashwings or dragons. So Necria might be a bit more of a resource card in a way, Ash being a very important resource to this deck, and it might actually be one that is a bit more powerful than it looks, I think. Yendurai is another 1-cost summon spell, and you can have 3 of these in your deck. Yendurai itself is a little underwhelming on the stats front. It's a 3/3, so 3 power and 3 health, but it enters the arena with an endurance counter. And if Yendurai would be dealt damage, you remove the endurance counter and prevent 3 of that damage, which means that your opponent needs to either throw 2 attacks or at least 2 sources of damage at Yendurai in order to finish it off. So Yendurai, what I've been talking throughout the video about those turns when you're trying to build up 2 dragons on the board, build up 2 dragons on the board, build up 2 dragons on the board, just present consistent threats. Yendurai is one that if you pair it with another dragon, if they don't have the Phantasm popper, or if you've got Mirror Guy and a way to prevent this from being destroyed by Phantasm, all of a sudden your board starts to get a little more challenging for your opponent to dismantle. Yes, these dragons don't have Spectra, unlike Prism's auras, but they do have a reasonable amount of health, and they can't, once you get up towards 3-4 health on these cards, or 3 health plus an endurance counter in Yendurai's case, it actually is quite a lot of resources for your opponent to be able to throw multiple attacks at all these dragons each turn. And because your dragons on your turn are going to be hitting with haste effectively, you're probably you can maintain tempo if it requires 3 to 4 cards for them to deal with what you're putting out each turn, because you get to both attack and then they have to spend their 3 or 4 cards killing your dragons that you've put out onto the board. So I can see Yendurai being a key piece in those strategies that are trying to overwhelm the opponent with dragons. Themai, similarly, perhaps not similarly, Themai has a very specific role. So it costs 2, and you can have 3 of them in your deck. And it says it's a 3 for 4. So again, that 4 health I think is going to be an important health breakpoint for these dragons. And I should have mentioned, just like all allies, at the end of your turn, your dragons will heal back up to full health if they're not killed. So your opponent does need to deal that 4 damage in each turn to be able to kill them. Themai says opponents can't play or activate abilities during your turn. So this I think is going to be a sideboard card. It's very obviously good against the wizard decks, but it's also good against decks that are playing defense reactions or decks like Oldham that want to use Crown of Seeds on their turn or any other activated ability really. So this has some really powerful applications in shutting down defense reactions, shutting down wizards, and shutting down activated abilities on some equipment that wants to be used on your turn. But it is a little bit more niche, so I think it will see more play out of the sideboards. So damage compression is something else that I want to talk about here. So this is the concept that you can do more damage in one turn by either building up a board state of dragons, which is an obvious way of compressing damage, outputting larger amounts of damage on a turn than the usual, 3, 6, 9, 12, 4-card hand, each of which has a value sort of 3. So something like Red Hot, for example, is something that scales the more that you are presenting on the board. So the more that you have, the more you can compress into one turn and present to your opponent to try and overwhelm them. So these are some of the cards that can allow you to get over the top of more defensive decks, decks where they're playing slower, they're hoping to try and run you out of cards, and just deal with your threats individually as you present them. Things like Yendurai can help with that, as I mentioned, for being a resilient, sticky threat on the board. But things like Red Hot can also punish those decks that allow you to build up a bit of a board state by delivering, for 2 resources in 1 card. If you get up to 4 or 5 Ashwings and a dragon, obviously that's a good board state to have, but it might not be able to get through damage against something like an Oldham that's got a Rampart and a Crown of Seeds and everything else. So what Red Hot allows you to do is convert each of those chain links that you're presenting on those turns into an additional source of a really potentially significant amount of damage. So when Red Hot is played as chain link 4 or higher, it has, when you attack with this, reveal the top X cards of your deck, where X is the number of draconic chain links you control, remembering that each dragon and each either Ashwing is going to be a draconic chain link. You deal damage equal to the number of red cards you reveal this way to any target, then shuffle. So not only do you get a 2 for 4 attack, but you also get this other source of damage that is coming on top of it, equal to basically how many chain links you've got, or 60% of how many chain links you've got. So that's a good way to compress a whole lot of damage onto those turns later in the game, once you have built up a bit of a board state against those more defensive decks. Another card that allows you to do that a little bit is Uprising. So this synergizes well with Dromai's hero ability in those more defensive matchups. So your next 4 Draconic attacks this turn gain +1, which can put your dragons onto really interesting breakpoints. It can buff all your Aether Ashwings to 2 attack. It also turns on your Go Again as a 0-cost red card with Go Again. So it'll turn on your Go Again for all your dragons because you played a red card this turn. So it's just got some little subtle synergies with Dromai, and is another way you can compress more damage into those big turns against more defensive decks. Another card, I've done these in the wrong order, is Burn Them All. So it's another 0-cost red card with Go Again. So it's going to turn on all your dragons to have Go Again. And it says once per turn, when a dragon attacks, it deals 1 arcane damage to each opponent. So it's only going to trigger once per turn. But it's a way that if you, for instance, can build up 3 of these in play towards the end of the game when you're going for these big turns, then all of a sudden each of your dragon attacks, which includes either Ashwings, your first dragon attack on the turn, can deal 3 additional arcane damage. So this is some damage that you can bank on the board and compress it all into that turn when you want to try and overwhelm your opponent's defenses. This has a similar ability to the channels, Channel Lake Frigid, etc. At the beginning of your end step, you put a raise counter on it, and then you destroy it unless you banish a red card from your graveyard for each raise counter on it. So the first turn you need to banish a red card from your graveyard, second turn you need to banish 2, and so on and so forth. So you can't just have them sitting there all game, but if you can pitch stack and get them to a point where you can play them across 1 or 2 turns just before you want to alpha strike a defensive deck, then you can potentially get all 3 of them in play at that key moment. Value attacks. So these are some attack action cards. So everything we've discussed so far, other than the specialization on the last slide, is a non-attack action card basically. Whereas these are some of the attacks that you might want to include alongside your dragon summoning spells to just get a little bit of extra damage. So Lava Burst is on the weaker side, so this is less likely to make it into a classic constructed build. But certainly in Limited, it's worth thinking about as something that rewards you again, particularly against more defensive decks, for allowing you to build up either Ashwings. Against something like Wizard that has a bit more trouble clearing out the either Ashwings, Lava Burst can just be a really good value attack. Blocks for 3, which is nice. And if you do have a few Ashwings in play and you can get 3 attacks before this one, if it's Chainlink 4 or higher, it becomes 0 for 5, which is just pretty good value as far as attacks go. Thor is another just sort of value card to include. So if you block with this, or if you attack with it, any way you get it into your graveyard, you basically get a free ability against an ice deck. So against Icelander specifically, you can get rid of a Frostbite for free at the start of your turn, you can get rid of an Ice Affliction for free, or you can unfreeze a frozen card, which could potentially allow you to access your arsenal, or access one of your equipment that's been frozen by Icelander. And you don't have to pay any resources. It triggers at the start of your turn. Yes, you have to banish this, so you only get to do that once in the game per Thor in your deck, but it's a pretty powerful ability to be able to get that incidentally without having to invest anything in it. Sweeping Blow is another one that I think is going to be a bit of a mainstay of these decks. Just like Billowing Mirage, which I talked about earlier, it costs 1, so you can pitch a red to play it, meaning you generate an Ash, but also when you attack with it, you create an Ash token as well. So this is a good way to net yourself 2 Ash. The red version obviously triggering Dromai, so it gives all your dragons Go Again. It has Go Again itself, and it comes in for 3. So a 1 for 3 Go Again is not the greatest rate in terms of attack action cards, but that extra Ash that you create for playing this, I think is going to be very, 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 very important for these dragon-heavy Dromai decks in particular. Blaze Headlong is just another value card. Dromai is asking you to play red cards each turn, and Blaze Headlong is just another way in a more attack action focused build, perhaps one that doesn't lean quite so heavily into the big dragons, or perhaps plays a more select few dragons at the higher end, and tries to play more attack action cards that don't have Phantasm. I think Blaze Headlong could really fulfill a strong role, a really solid role, in allowing you to do a bit more before your first Phantasm attack. So you can, play a Sweeping Blow or play a Billowing Mirage, follow up with a Blaze Headlong. So you've had a pretty decent chunk of damage in there already, and then potentially come in with an Ashwing or two, like a Rake the Embers or a Dragon after that. So Blaze Headlong, worth considering, although the one downside to it, or the main downside to it, other than blocking for 2, is that it's not a good opener. So unlike Sweeping Blow, unlike Billowing Mirage, you can't actually open the turn with this because it doesn't naturally have Go Again. Some good Phantasm cards in this set. Again, these are going to be different variants to play on the Dromai deck, but one thing that's worth thinking about when potentially including Ambermaw Centipie or Dunebreaker Centipie is that Phantasmal Footsteps works with these, right? So unlike the dragons where you can't use a Phantasmal Footsteps to get back your action point if they're popped by Phantasm, these are attack action cards. So if they are destroyed, they're illusionist attack action cards. If they're destroyed by Phantasm, then you can actually get your action point back by paying 1 to your Footsteps. So playing a Dunebreaker Centipie as an opener on your turn isn't quite as high risk, because even if they block with a Phantasm Popper, you can pay 1, get your action point back, and then do whatever else it was that you were going to do, and you've got a Phantasm Popper out of their hand already. So Dunebreaker Centipie, definitely a good opener at red, one that I'll be including, I think, in most Dromai decks I play, particularly if I'm playing Footsteps. And Ambermaw Centipie, similarly, just a good closer. And interestingly, if they do destroy the Ambermaw Centipie, you can get your action point back with Footsteps and then potentially do other things. So they're left in a bit of an interesting bind at that point, I think. And if they destroy it, of course, you get an Ash token as well, which means if you're holding one card, it could be a 0-cost dragon that you're going to play after that. And then if they don't pop it and they take the damage, you can just Arsenal the 0-cost dragon. So there's a few interesting play patterns to think about with both of these Centipies and Phantasmal Footsteps. But all in all, they're basically Enigma Chimera and Spears of Surreality with some upside, because if they're destroyed, you get an Ash token and they're Draconic. I mentioned Spears of Surreality, and that is also one that you might consider for the same reason. It works with Footsteps, and it's a good opener on your turns. It's a red card. You cost 1, so you pitch 1, play it, get an Ash token, you get a 5-power attack. Yes, it's got Phantasm, but you've got Footsteps. So yeah, definitely worth considering including all of these cards, I think, in a Dromai deck that's wanting to put out a bit more damage rather than focusing on just building board presence and trying to overwhelm with allies. Some other role players, Semblance, a really important piece to just negate a Phantasm triggered effect on a dragon. So it says negate all Phantasm triggered effects of target illusionist attack you control. So that can include a dragon, it can include an attack action card. The attack loses and can't gain Phantasm. So you play this in response to them blocking with their 6-power attack. This negates it, so it's an instant. It's got the negate keyword, which means those effects that are negated don't resolve, so the attack's not destroyed. And because they've blocked, they're probably unlikely to play more blocks. I think with the timing, though, because you're negating this at the moment they commit 1 blocking card, I think they still have another window to block with more cards after this. But nonetheless, you still get a reasonable amount of advantage from the fact that if you have this in Arsenal, you play an important dragon, get in there for an attack, they try to pop it with their Phantasm Popper, you play this from your Arsenal, save your dragon. It might cause them a little bit of trouble because they might not even be able to successfully block the attack and come back and kill the dragon on their turn. So it's just a way that you can try and interrupt their flow, and it's just a good basically combat trick to try and win a pivot or win an exchange in a deck that otherwise gives a lot of control to the opponent about trying to 2-for-1 you or gain advantage through exchanges. It is expensive, it costs 3, but I think it is a blue that's worth considering at least in those decks that are playing more dragons. And even just the existence of the card, I think, makes Dromai a lot more powerful. Passing Mirage is another one. So this was an existing card from Everfest. It's a 0-cost aura with Spectra. It says your first illusionist attack each turn, includes dragons and other allies, loses and can't gain Phantasm. Important to remember that you don't get to choose which attack loses and can't gain Phantasm. So if you have this in play and you play like a Billowing Mirage or a Sweeping Blow, Sweeping Blow I think it's called, yeah, the one that generates an Ash. Those cards don't have Phantasm anyway, and if they're your first attack on the turn, they will eat up this ability, and then your dragon will still have Phantasm. So you just need to be a little bit careful about how you sequence your plays. It might mean that if you're playing Passing Mirage, you play a few more red non-attack actions, things like Uprising or whatever else, Rake the Embers, and try and open your turns with those so that they don't eat up your Phantasm, and then your dragon can attack without Phantasm. Blood of the Drakai is another one. So when you pitch this, the next 3 Draconic cards you play this turn cost 1 less. Potentially very powerful, especially if you're playing a sequence of cards that cost 1. Obviously, really synergizes well with Dromai, gives you an Ash, and allows you to play things like the 1-cost dragons and Rake the Embers and Sweeping Blow all in the one turn, or Billowing Mirage. So I can see this being quite a powerful role player, and allowing you to do more than might be expected off one pitch card, because in addition to pitching effectively for 1 on each of your next 3 cards you play, so pitching for 3, it is also generating an Ash. So yeah, very powerful card, I think. Cadaverous Contraband is another one that could be a bit of a role player. So we've seen that particularly the legendary 1 per deck dragons are extremely powerful, but obviously once the non-attack action, the summon, the invoke spell goes to the graveyard, it's not to be seen again, except for Cadaverous Contraband, which can allow you to, if it hits, put a non-attack action card from your graveyard on top of your deck. So I think like Invoke Tomaltai, Invoke Dominia, Invoke Dracona Optimi are some of the most powerful non-attack action cards we've seen, and they're legendary, meaning they're even more sort of valuable and scarce. So that all of those things together increase the value of Cadaverous Contraband in these decks. Also just giving you a toolbox of all the dragons that have gone to the graveyard, all the invoke spells, makes Cadaverous Contraband definitely one worth considering. Transmogrify is another one that I think people might be underrating a little bit. So if we think back to what I've been describing all throughout this video, it's about turn openers that are red, so turn on all your dragons, give them go again, have go again themselves, and that 1 cost is not necessarily a bad thing because it also allows you to generate an incidental Ash. And I think Transmogrify fits all of those things perfectly. It gets around, to some extent, the Passing Mirage issue that we talked about, and it can allow you to get more value out of playing smaller attacks, so things like blue Sweeping Blow, or blue and yellow Billowing Mirage. I think it's Billowing Mirage. I always forget what it's called. Anyway, I'm gonna get the card out. Billowing Mirage, yeah, I got the name right. So yeah, blue or yellow Billowing Mirage, which all these things that have on-play effects have go again. If you play Transmogrify and then play them, you're getting a lot more value out of it. And if you're, as in you're getting like a base 8 power attack out of it, you're also able to get your action point back from Footsteps if they're popped, because they will be attack action cards with Phantasm, and they'll be Illusionist because Transmogrify makes them that, even if they aren't already. And I think interestingly, it also synergizes really well with Fractal Replication, because if you're making things big, giving attacks Illusionist and Phantasm so that they're covered by Footsteps, but also 8 base attacks, so if they have an existing on-hit or on-play ability, you're getting extra value there. And then also, if they don't pop it, you're able to follow up with Fractal Replication. I can see that being reasonably powerful. So Transmogrify could be a role player. It fits, the red one particularly, fits all of the criteria for being a bit of a role player in Dromai, and allowing perhaps some of those more aggressive Dromai decks to get a bit more damage output. Some control options to mention specifically from this set, because as I mentioned, Dromai's Ashwings don't actually block damage, so you can be quite vulnerable to the backswing. Obviously, you're putting out a lot of threats, but there's the potential that they can just ignore your threats and your dragons and mandatorily strip cards from your hand with things like Crippling Crush or Oakenold or whatever else. So some of the control options that you can use to try and mitigate that on the backswing, things like Sandcover, a 0 for 4 that prevents, is not a card that's defending from hand, so it gets around Dominate. It gives Ward 4, so it gets around Arcane damage, can be powerful against Kano, can be powerful against Bravo, and against Oldhim, and those big dominate attacks, and powerful against Icelander as well, if Icelander's putting out a lot of arcane damage on your turn that's hard to cover up. So Sandcover, I think, a pretty powerful card. It does consume an Ash, and they do have some selection in the sense that if they're playing at instant speed and you play your Sandcover, they can then interrupt that by playing another damage source at instant speed to consume your Ward 4, particularly against Wizards. But and I'm thinking things like Waning Moon here. But all in all, I think Sandcover is a versatile and good card worth playing. Oasis Respite is another 1-cost card, as I mentioned many times, not so bad in Dromai for things to cost 1, although it does mean when you're talking about defensive cards that you're probably pitching another card to play this. You're probably pitching on your opponent's turn, which you're not doing a lot of generally, except you could pitch a yellow to play Oasis Respite and block with Footsteps, which might be good in some matchups. Particularly against Fi, if you're looking at Kodachis and Mask of Momentum and things like that. And this can incidentally gain you a life as well. So I think this is one worth testing. It's got a lot of power and a lot of upside. And if you do find that you're getting into patterns of wanting to pitch for Footsteps on your opponent's turn a bit more, and you've got a few yellows or blues in your deck, then Oasis Respite might be one that makes it in as well. Of course, all the existing 0-for-4 defense reactions can also fulfill a similar role. So some of the dangers I just want to talk about quickly. I know it's been a long video already, but some of the dangers for Dromai I've touched on include Phantasm Poppers, but Fog Down is pretty much a Dromai hoser. Like, it costs 3. It says non-attack action cards lose and can't gain go again. At the beginning of your action phase, destroy Fog Down. And what that basically says is that your opponent can play this, and any of your Invoke spells, any of your Rake the Embers are not going to have go again. So they're not going to be viable openers anymore. So you're going to be left with only really Billowing Mirage and other attack actions, Dunebreaker, Centipede, etc., that have go again, because your non-attack action cards won't have go again. So you can't add dragons to the board, basically, once this is down, for the turn that it's down, which can be quite disruptive. I do think there are probably enough other lines that these decks have, and a lot of Dromai decks are probably not going to be, mandatorily playing dragons every single turn. That Fog Down may not be the strongest, but I can see that for an Oldhim deck or a defensive deck that's trying to interrupt your flow of back-to-back turns of multiple dragons, getting a Fog Down into play could be a big deal. Of course, it doesn't have go again. So they're not going to be able to clear a dragon necessarily on the turn that they play it. But if it's Bravo and they go Zealous Belting into Fog Down, then potentially that could be a bit of a combo breaker to stop the Dromai deck from getting on a roll. So Fog Down's one to watch out for. Channel Lake Frigid is, of course, a massive hosing. It makes all of your dragons cost 1 to attack, all your Ashwings cost 1 to attack. It makes everything in your deck, which is running on a pretty low curve, cost 1 more. It means that your Draconic Chess piece no longer generates net resources. It's just awful. So Channel Lake Frigid, just avoid it if you can, basically. Frostbite similarly can cause a bit of pain, but not nearly as much as Channel Lake Frigid. And big attacks, just like Swing Big, that have 6 or more base power and are not illusionist attacks, are something that all Dromai players are going to have to watch out for and have a plan for. As we've discussed, whether it's Chromai or any of the other dragons that help you to mitigate Phantasm, or cards like Passing Mirage, there are tools out there to help you mitigate that downside of Phantasm, but it's always there. It's the elephant in the room, it's looming large, and you need to have a plan to deal with it, however you construct your Dromai deck. So I mentioned some equipment. Skullcap or the new Crown of Provenance are both good headpieces. Flamescale Furnace, the Draconic Chest, slots in perfectly into Dromai. So as a once per turn instant, you pay 1 resource. You gain 1 resource for each red card in your pitch zone. So if you've pitched 2 reds, you've already got... So you pitch 1 red, you play something, then you can pitch another red to activate this, and you'll gain 2 from the second red you pitch, which is nice. It means that your second red pitches for 2 effectively, and you can only activate this if you've played a red card this turn. So it's a bit of another restriction on when you can play it. It does have temper and it blocks for 2, which is pretty nice for a chess piece. So definitely a powerful equipment and worth considering. Ghostly Touch, I won't go into too much. I mean, it's really hard to evaluate without having played the decks a lot. I think it might help a bit in some of the grindier matchups where you think you might have maybe 15 or so dragons plus Ashwings, and if 5, 6, 7 of those, even more, get popped in some matchups, I can see game states where this gets quite big by the end of the game. And if you can combine this with something that removes Phantasm from it, or get to a point where you're certain that your opponent doesn't have a Phantasm popper in hand, this can just allow you to get an extra attack in that could be reasonably large for 3 cost. So Ghostly Touch, definitely a powerful ability on equipment, but quite niche and might not always work out. Starlit Stilettos is a one-off Phantasm action point refunder, but it works on allies as well as attack action cards. I still think Phantasmal Footsteps, even though it doesn't work on allies, is probably going to be the foot equipment of choice, or the leg equipment of choice for most Dromai decks, simply because it does still work on all your attack action cards, whether it's the Centipires or Spears of Sariality or things that you've transmogrified, and it's got the defensive ability to block as well if you do pitch on your opponent's turn. Remains to be seen how often you want to be doing that and how good that is. But I do think having an outlet to generate Ash before your turn starts is going to be something that some Dromai decks are pretty happy to do. So I think Footsteps, it's a powerful card, and I think it is still going to be good in Dromai. So that brings us to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I appreciate everyone's support. As I said at the start of the video, thanks to Underground Games for supporting us. If you do want to pick up some singles, whether it's from Uprising or any other set, you can head along and use the code TWA5 to get 5% off your order. I've really enjoyed putting this Hero Spotlight video together. If there's something you think I missed or an interaction from Dromai that you're really excited about that I didn't touch on, please let me know, because I'm going through that same process as everyone else right now, theory crafting, trying to see how we can push the power level of this deck. And I look forward to seeing how it performs in the upcoming Road to Nationals season. Thanks for watching. I've been Jesse Muleman Marshall for The Winning Agenda. Cheers.